Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Roaster School here at Mill City Roasters up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where it is not so cold at all, blazing hot today. Don't tell anybody though, we like to keep those things secret. It's freezing up here, don't come up here. All these folks did come up here though, braved the weather. Usually it's just me by my lonesome, and here I have a classroom full of people that are attending the Roaster School live here at Mill City, and many of them are first-time roasters. So if you are a first-time roaster, raise your hand for me if you wouldn't mind. Yeah, that's awesome. We and Mill City really like to have an opportunity to introduce you to roasting hands-on, so that the very first time you're touching a machine, you have somebody right there with you to kind of walk you through the nuts and bolts of how that machine operates. So that's what a lot of folks here are doing. However, there are also other people that are much more familiar with coffee that take these first-time classes and just kind of get a refresher, a review, and maybe see things through a different set of eyes. So no matter how much time you've spent behind the roaster, coming to one of these classes is definitely very helpful. So we're inviting you today to sit in part of the class with us as we introduce concepts of roasting. So when I think about coffee roasting, I think about three main areas I call them areas of knowledge. Green coffee, or what we can refer to as the seed, or what some people call the bean. Also thinking about the machine, of course, the machine that you're going to roast on, which we're surrounded by here, and also thinking about taste. Those three things. So usually when people start venturing into getting their own business of roasting, one of those three areas is something that they're already kind of involved in, that they're already intrigued by. For instance, Steve and Nick, who own Mill City, they were intrigued by the machine side of this business, the equipment side. I came to it from the taste side of the business. And other people still, I know that we have somebody here who grows coffee in Honduras, maybe coming at it from the seed side, looking at just the knowledge of that one thing. If you take your expertise, or let's call it your area of knowledge that gives you the most joy, and follow that path, you will be a successful roaster. Even if you are coming, like for myself, I came from the taste side. Coming at roasting from the taste side, even though I really didn't have a grip on the mechanics of the machine, and I needed to learn all of the stuff about origin and growing coffee, I could taste my way to roasting coffee well. And the same thing has been true for other people that I've seen that have expertise in those three areas. However, coming to classes like this and learning from people that know the machine, or learning from people that know green coffee or know how to taste, can help you gain expertise in those other areas, so that then you become a multifaceted roaster, and that's what I would call a master roaster, or somebody that really understands the craft. Today, we're really looking at the equipment side more than anything. It will culminate to tasting as well, because you need to know what your output is. But looking at the equipment and understanding that equipment, especially if you're buying a particular machine, getting that information from the horse's mouth, so to speak, is a really important start to being an expert in that area. Okay? So when I think about a coffee roaster, I think about it as a system overall, and there are all these crazy things. And Steve was saying earlier in this class that when you step up to a new roaster, it's kind of like driving for the first time, where your mind has to focus on all of these different areas and you really can't pay attention to any one given thing. I want you to kind of pull back from that idea for a minute and just think of the whole thing as one system. Every roaster has its own individual idiosyncrasies, its own individual control, air, fan, be it a damper or a fan speed. You have your heating element, you have the metal of the drum, how it absorbs the heat from the element, how it passes that heat into the coffee. whether it holds on to that energy for a long time like cast iron, or whether it gives it off really nice and easy like stainless steel. You have all of these different things, but if you focus on all of those things too much too early, you'll kind of get lost in the weeds. So sit down to your machine when you first get it and when you first start roasting, and just kind of take it all in, relax, and let the coffee kind of go through the motion of roasting. I know that the more I have roasted coffee, the fewer adjustments and the fewer finagling details I pay attention to. As you get more and more used to your equipment, it is much like driving a car. When you're driving that car and you're in complete control, you're not sitting there fiddling with stuff. You're chill in the seat and focusing on the road ahead of you. So the more time you spend with it, the further down the road you're going to be able to see. That's one of the things that I noticed when I first started driving a car, is that I felt like I couldn't even see the road right in front of me because the hood was so high, and I needed to see like what was right there. But then as you gain control, you can see further into the distance, and that's really what a roaster is. A roaster is a culinary artist who is cooking this food and needs to see into the future of where this food is going to end up in order to control the present of where the food is now. Okay? So in doing so, think about that roaster as just a source of energy for a moment. Okay? If you think about energy is transferred from one place that has high amounts of energy to another place that has low amounts of energy. This is true for molecules in space, for instance, where you have high concentration of molecules and a low concentration of air. Those high concentration will move out and diffuse. Energy in a machine does the same thing. The energy is stifled in there, and it moves out when you put something cold in it, which is the coffee, and then that coffee starts absorbing that energy. If you just think about that relationship of the coffee, which has low amounts of energy, and the drum, which has high amounts of energy, you really can control that coffee and how quickly it comes up to meet the drum's energy level, because they try to reach this equilibrium of energy. You can think about that as like how you set up the drum to begin with. If your drum is way too hot and you have way too much energy and you're just pumping air through and you're pumping heat through, your coffee is going to slam up toward that energy source, right? That diffusion is going to be sharp. It's just like hitting the pedal to the metal as soon as you're taking off in your car. If your drum doesn't have enough energy in it, then the coffee's not really going to come up very easily. It's going to take forever for it to draw up to where the energy of the drum is. So there's a relationship here. Another part of that is it's not just going to be a straight line that your coffee moves from its temperature that you put it in up to the temperature of the drum. It's going to be a curved line, because as that energy in the drum is absorbed, it no longer has the same amount of pull on the coffee, and that's why you see the slope of a curve kind of slope. So if you think about it mathematically, you can kind of think it's going to move real fast, and then it's going to continually slow down at a regular clip until it comes to meet the energy of the drum. So all that to say, relax, set that drum up at a good amount of temperature or energy when you put the coffee in, and let the coffee kind of do its thing. And do this a bunch so that you really see how does the energy of this drum set to different settings affect the speed that this coffee is moving. And that's really the first step to learning how to roast. It's not going to taste awesome at first. Well, you might accidentally taste something awesome, and then it's going to be frustrating because you're going to want to repeat that. But really, as you're first getting into roasting, just taking that time to watch those curves and watch how coffee comes into what I like to call a landing when you finally drop it out of the roaster is going to kind of set you free and get you so comfortable with the movement of coffee through time and change that then when you want to go backward, you can start making adjustments from there. The very first step is to think about how hot is my roaster and how long do I want it to roast and to what degree. And then kind of shoot for that, almost like you're using a catapult okay? Think about your destination, think about your energy source, and then just launch the coffee toward that destination and kind of let it fly. Then as you begin to hit that destination, you can start thinking backwards about the points along the path that got you to that destination. You can think backward to first crack, backward to when it started turning brown, when it turned yellow, when it turned around, and then you can start thinking about even the in-between times of, okay, it was yellow to brown, brown to first. What happens if I bend this line flatter or I bend this line more sharp? How does that affect the flavor? And then your destination is not only going to become time and temp and color, it will then start melding into becoming flavor notes. Okay, when it was this time, this temp, and this color, I got roasted hazelnut, I got chocolate, and I got a little bit of caramel. I really want more of that caramel. What can I do to get more of that caramel? And then you start working your way backward and bending the curve in different ways until that one note really comes out. Does that sound cool? So simplify it and then complicate it as you get more and more used to your equipment. Start with a coffee that you can just launch, just like a boulder. And then once you've done that a whole bunch, get some really nice coffee so that you're not, so that roasting doesn't become a drag early on in the process. Another really good analogy for this is music. If you sit down to play the piano and you start with a really, intense piece, you're going to be really frustrated, okay? Piano only has 88 keys. That's all that there is. But music can be as complex as you can possibly imagine with those 88 keys. And you can find that with any kind of cooking, basically, in particular roasting. But if you simplify it and you practice just one thing at one time, then you'll grow in your knowledge. And what's cool about coffee is that the more interesting, the more fresh and vibrant and high scoring and complicated a particular coffee is, it seems like the easier it is to roast that coffee well. That's one of the things that's beautiful about quality coffee. So then once you kind of burn through and you're feeling confident with the machine, get some quality coffee in that machine and then see if you can get it, tasting similar to what you were hoping that it tastes for. Like Steve said earlier, it takes about 100 roasts to really get your feet underneath you, and then maybe 100 more as you're starting to kind of make decisions and plan for the future. I would say that at about 1,000 roasts in, then you start hitting your head against the wall again. It kind of complicates itself, and you kind of go through waves of, do I even know what I'm doing? Don't be frustrated. Don't worry, you're not alone. That's the other thing about having a source of education, is that you guys can always contact Mill City, contact me at Cafe Imports, contact other roasters in your area, stay connected. There are a lot of online forums that can help keep you vibrantly attached to what you're doing, keep it fresh, try new things. Don't fall into a rut, push yourself, break it, have fun with it, make it fun. So do you guys have any questions about roasting that you might want to ask? No pressure. Yes?
When we were practicing today, we went over kind of temperatures up to like 5 minutes and then 5 minutes again, and then kind of a 3 or 4 minute step up.
Okay.
I assume those aren't exact numbers, and what happens if you go over a little bit or under a little bit, on those roasts? Will it just give you a different taste, different feel?
Yeah, so the question is, if you have a set amount of time that you want certain things to happen, and you go over that amount of time, or you come up short in that amount of time, what is the effect of that? It will definitely affect the taste. The question then becomes, is it a positive effect or is it a negative effect? Well, then when you think about a positive effect or a negative effect, now all of a sudden you're thinking about marketing. You're not really thinking about, you're thinking about either it's positive for my customer or I like it better, So when you go into roasting, as you get more proficient at it and you're actually building a business around this, it is important to understand what your target is. That target really for a customer is going to be a flavor profile, right? So then am I closer to that flavor profile by going over a certain time or over a certain temp, or am I further away from that flavor target? So that's going to come with taste, taste, taste. So that's the other side of this, is the more you roast, the more you got to taste. And then you'll start drawing these parallels. Our brains are really good at making connections. Like for instance, if you think about the concept of 1 + 1 = 2. Well, usually we learn 1 + 1 = 2 as like this writ concept, even though maybe as a child we don't quite conceptualize one thing plus another thing equals two things. You can just memorize that information, and then your brain just kind of locks it away, and it becomes like second hand, or second nature to you. That's the way roasting is going to become, so that when you taste something on the table, all of a sudden you'll have this instinctual knowledge of, oh, well, I made the roast, go a little fast during that time. Of course this tastes that way this time. But that's just going to come with a lot of time. So the short answer to your question is anything you change in your profile will affect your outcome of flavor. Even if I've done experiments where we've changed the time by 5 seconds, and if you're tasting them side by side, you can taste those 5-second changes. Yeah, coffee, basically the molecular change that you're doing in coffee is kind of like a domino effect. So you have all these dominoes set up. If I push them down, they start falling, right? That's just like molecules breaking apart as it's going through chemical reactions. The further down that chain, the more have broken apart. So if you think about it spreading out as it's falling apart, if I stop that at a certain point, only X number of dominoes have fallen. If the next time I stop it at another point, more dominoes have fallen. And the same thing is true for that molecular or the chemical reactions that are taking place in roasting. So if I let it go even just a little bit longer, there are different flavors that are going to pop up, or other flavors that are no longer available. And usually it's more of like a complexity thing. Like this one has a little bit more sweetness and this one has a little bit more or less acidity. So roasting is almost like playing with dials on these different flavors. Yes?
Do I have to be a good coffee taster to become a good coffee roaster?
It's a great question. So the question is, does he have to become a good coffee taster to become a good coffee roaster? And I would go back to that idea of those 3 areas where you have machine, you have the seed, and you have taste. So if you are proficient at understanding equipment, you can be an awesome roaster. If you are proficient at understanding that seed and the complexity of that seed, you can be a great roaster without having a proficiency in taste. Like think about somebody who may not even be able to taste, who may be handicapped in that area. They can still roast coffee well. There are a lot of other tools. You can weigh the coffee in, weigh the coffee out, and see the difference. You can get a color spectrometer, a tool that measures the outside of the color, and then you grind the coffee and you measure the internal color, and you can track those color variations over time. You can have friends that are good tasters that give you feedback and information. So having good customer relationships with the people that are buying your coffee. There are a lot of ways to get around that. However, if you also are a good taster, you'll be a better roaster than if you are not tasting the coffee. So tasting that coffee is a vital part of understanding it more. So if you can incorporate that component, it will help in the long run. But I would say you can still be a great roaster without it. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So how do you handle beans from one year to the next when they're available and getting the batches to be the same in terms of, let's say it's a bean roast you offer seasonally.
Uh-huh.
Come around next year, you want to offer the same thing. How do you get the same roast each time?
This is a great question. Yeah, so the question is, if you have a coffee all year round, it goes out of season, and then you get that coffee again the next year, how do you keep it tasting the same? The true answer is you cannot do it. The best way to handle that is to find a coffee of similar flavor profile to where your target flavors are, and bring that coffee in as the flavor in your old coffee is fading out. So thinking about similar types of coffee is a great way to do that. So for instance, Mexican coffee and a Peruvian coffee, they have opposite harvest periods, and they have similar profiles enough so that as a roaster, you can kind of make them taste the same. Well, if you're using them in a blend, then as your Mexican coffee begins to get older, start subbing in a little bit of the Peruvian coffee, pulling out a little of the Mexican coffee, and then slowly move over to the Peru. It's more about not having what I call flavor whiplash, where you just have like this totally different coffee all of a sudden. It's more about moving the dial slowly, because coffee is going to taste different. Coffee, today, the coffee that you have, that you're roasting here, next month it will taste different. So even though it's the same exact coffee, everything's the same, just over time, since it is an organic product, it will change. Organic products change over time. So finding coffees that are similar is the best way to do that. And then pay attention to your profile. If you know that a coffee is getting older and you start tasting things like what we call age, which tastes kind of like, it's an actual chemical compound, but it tastes kind of like paper or cardboard. If you start tasting that flavor, then do things with your roast profile that pull that flavor to the background or out of the coffee completely. One effective thing I found to help with age flavor is just elongating the roast. Roast it a longer amount of time. That seems to dull that age flavor a little bit. Not universal, but it's a good help. Yeah. And then don't buy coffee for too long. You know, if you're sitting on 12 months worth of coffee, that's too much coffee. Yep. So we call that being long. It's much better to be short coffee than long coffee for quality purposes. It might be better to be long for price purposes, and both are important. Yes, ma'am.
So what's the ideal length that you would keep a coffee?
That is a great question. So the question is, how long should we keep a coffee? What's the ideal length of time? And unfortunately, the answer is a little up in the air. It really depends on the coffee. We have had some coffees come in and 2 months after they're in, they're dead. They taste like nothing but age. We've had other coffees for 1.5 years that taste lovely. Generally, processing, in particular, the amount of time that coffee is given to dry and rest before shipment, has a major effect on how long that coffee will stay fresh. So good processing, good drying techniques will result in fresher coffee for longer. So talking to whoever you're buying the coffee from, asking questions about how was this coffee processed, what was the moisture content, what was the water activity, those kinds of things are good questions to ask. Just asking simply how long do you think this particular coffee will last, if you think you need to keep it for a long amount of time. General rules of thumb, 4 to 6 months once you bought the coffee, if the coffee's fresh. If it's fresh, it's already probably 3 months off the tree. So if you keep it 6 months, then it's 9 months off the tree generally. Any other questions? Yes, in the back, Nick.
Can you break down the difference in potential roast variance between end temperature and length of roast?
So give a general rule of thumb on what is good practice for roast time overall?
How does roast length affect flavor differently than end temperature?
Great, yes. So roast length, or the amount of time that a coffee is in the drum, solely detached from temperature, will result in how quickly you move through chemical reactions and whether or not you move through chemical reactions. If your coffee is moving very slow through time and temperature, then there's actually a roast defect called baking, which is kind of, I don't know why they call it baking, because technically all coffee that we're roasting is technically baked. It's in a convection oven. If we bake the coffee out, you'll get these, it'll just be kind of like super flat and dull, okay? Don't think about that in terms of the paper flavor. If you're tasting that paper flavor, that's probably old green coffee, okay? And also, if you're tasting grassiness with like hay-like characteristic, that's generally not baking too. That generally means that you have under roasted the coffee. But baking is just like flat, dull coffee. Actually, a lot of your generic coffees taste pretty baked generally. They taste baked and over roasted. So the longer it's in, the flatter your curve, the fewer chemical reactions you're gonna have. Well, why is that? Because you need energy. You can't, if you knock over a domino and it just like barely falls, at some point there's not enough energy, it's not gonna push over the next domino. You gotta push those suckers and blast through them. Of course, if we blast through them too much, what's gonna happen? What happens? What if the curve's just straight up? You're gonna burn it, right? Yeah. So we go through those chemical reactions so fast that instead of the molecules breaking down into nice, neat patterns, they just explode out, and you move from what could have been potential flavor into just being like burnt, charry flavor. We call that scorching the coffee. Or if you go too long in that, it's called burning the coffee. Okay, you actually incinerate it. So having a nice even curve is good. Now I've seen a tendency, and I wanna give you a cautionary tale. No, caution you too. A lot of people will taste that grainy flavor in their coffee, or like a hay-like flavor, and they think that their coffee is baked. So if you think your coffee is baked, and you're roasting your coffee, and you're like 12 minutes to finish a batch, your coffee's not baked. 12 minutes is not gonna bake your coffee, okay? 15 minutes, maybe. 17 minutes, better chance. 18 minutes, you're probably baking your coffee. But if you're 12 minutes, you're not baking your coffee, okay? Your coffee is under roasted. Your coffee, in the core of it, is holding on to compounds that you have not yet broken down. And what I see people do to try to fix this problem is roast faster and faster and faster and faster. Well, that exacerbates the problem. It holds more of that interior. That under roasted component just gets bigger and bigger the more shallow into the roast you go. So if you're tasting something weird, don't just jump to the first conclusion. Try to roast it two opposite directions, okay? If you think that you're baking your coffee, just bake it on purpose and see whether or not that's actually what's happening. See if that, like, if you break it in that direction, then you know, okay, yeah, for sure, now I'm really getting tons of that flavor I was getting. But if not, you just saved yourself a ton of headache of backing up, okay? So there is definitely a correlation with flavor and the amount of time that your coffee is in the drum. Well, of course we know that the other access to that is temperature. So the amount of time that your coffee is in the drum correlates to how fast that coffee is moving through temperature. So if you're moving through temperature really slow, you're gonna have a really long roast. If you're moving really fast, you're gonna have a really fast roast. Some coffees taste better roasted fast. Some coffees you gotta roast slow. Don't be afraid to roast a coffee for 16 minutes. If it tastes better roasted 16 minutes, do it. If it tastes better roasted in 8 minutes, do that. Don't be afraid to just kind of bend the rules. Once you know the rules, you're affecting the rules, you're comfortable with your roaster, you're comfortable with the coffee, and something is making it taste better, continue down that path, okay? One of my favorite sayings if it tastes good, do that. Anything else? Any other questions? I think that pretty much wraps it up. We covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. If you do have other questions, know that for those of you here, you'll have the rest of the day. But then after that, you'll have the ability to ask Steve and Nick questions anytime. They're available, email, phone. I'm also available email, phone over at Cafe Imports. So we get a lot of questions. Sometimes it takes me a little while to get back, so just be patient. I'll eventually get back to you. If you send me an email with like 30 questions, it may take even longer, but I will get back eventually. All right, I think that's it. Thanks so much for joining us at home, and come join us in person sometime. We'll see you soon. Bye. Bye.